future, the roadmap of that for the next year or so?
So I would say PromQL is relatively stable by now, though we have been more open with regards to adding certain features to it in the past, and more statistical functions might come in the future, but we're unlikely to see a very radical change, at least before Prometheus 3.0 comes out at whatever time that might be, sometimes in future years. That would be a big change, but at least without introducing breaking changes, and while we still have Prometheus 2, it's not going to change too radically. The one thing that may be a quite interesting and potentially radical change without actually breaking anything is support for high definition histograms, which Björn Rabenstein and others are defining and currently working on. And so that is basically not just a change in the language, but also a change in kind of the type of histogram metrics that Prometheus can store and process and so on, all the way down to the storage layer. So yeah, that could, with some luck, happen this year. That would be really cool. And that is going to enable people to, on a very high level, have cheaper histograms. And cheaper means you can store more data at higher resolution. So in the end, you get better insight into the like request latency distribution of your service, for example, at a much lower cost. And that's the idea behind those.
But in addition to the core team, do some of the commercial vendors that use PromQL in their hosted products, their own products, do they contribute ideas and language suggestions as well? Or is it generally got most things people need?
Oh, no, for sure. People do contribute things. I would say there's probably even one project that I won't name right now, but that was a bit unhappy that we didn't add certain features. And so they went off and created their own Prometheus style software, which is totally fair. But like the Prometheus team has been a bit on the conservative side, especially historically, now not so much anymore, about completely changing some principles behind the language. And adding some new functions where we weren't sure whether they would behave the way we expect in the long run. So there's a whole discussion about our rate implementation versus one that is called X rate, and there's subtle differences between them. And the X rate probably also has its benefits, but you would have to kind of prove that there's not other additional problems with it. And so, yeah, but for sure, people have contributed things. I would say the language hasn't changed in a major way due to that. Most people just went and implemented what we had or tried to.
And final wrap-up question, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever years in the future, what do you feel will be the state of Prometheus and PromQL, or what would you like it to be?
Ideally, so if it's really that long into the future, it would be great to see a Prometheus version 3 at some point that irons out some of the kinks of the current language design. It would be great to have first-class metric typing in the TSDB, and so the time series database and the query language, because right now everything is just a flat time series and just some functions expect a counter, but they can't really check if it's a counter, or they expect a histogram, but they can't really check that. They will not give you an error. They will just give you like a wrong result, for example. Having more of that kind of support would be really great for users. The other thing is, again, this high definition histograms. I hope that happens sooner than that. And then making it easier or making it harder to build queries that fail silently. Currently, there are a lot of ways, especially around binary operators, filter expressions, and so on, even metric selectors, due to Prometheus's schemaless data model, to create selectors, binary operators, etc., that just yield an empty output. And an empty output in the alerting use case means everything is fine. And this, maybe not everything is actually fine because your expression didn't produce an output. It
Yeah.
could also have been that you wrote a metric name wrong, so it didn't select anything, that you didn't get the binary operator matching quite correct between two different sets of time series, so it also just gives you an empty output, versus some kind of warning or error or something like this. It's kind of nice to have this super flexible language that doesn't, have super strict error checking and expectations of a schema, because data can look whatever you want. But on the other hand, it does allow for a lot of cases where people write queries that don't behave the way they want, and in the worst case, silently failing alerts. It would be great if someone has ideas for how to improve that in a new version of the language at some point. And then in Prometheus in general, there's just a lot more integration happening now, I would say, around Prometheus, even in tools like Chronosphere, Grafana, and others, where people are marrying together the Prometheus data model in query language with other signal types. So you have traces, logs, etc., and you can jump between them if they come from different systems. So you're more easily able to correlate some kind of histogram that shows you that there's a lot of slow events happening to jumping, to a specific slow event and telling you why it was slow in a trace, for example.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much for joining me, Julius.
Thank you.